Spooky season's upon us with some bad injury luck, late starts, and the students back in session.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of the Locked On UCLA Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. Guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, let's go over this UCLA team, right? They're preparing for Oregon. They're getting there. What are some of the struggles UCLA has had in this season? Well, it's predicated a lot on the offensive line and the defensive line. Well, Deshaun Foster noted after practice the late Monday, the early Tuesday afternoon slot with UCLA students returning to campus, which hopefully should liven up the student section at the Rose Bowl, maybe. I don't know. UCLA has some injuries that have to be addressed, right? The Bruins were without Titus Mokiala-Atumalala. They had a couple of injuries. We already know about some injuries already out. But the big thing is Keanu Williams, the big transfer from Oregon a couple seasons ago, a defensive tackle. He is out for the year, right? He is announced he is out for the year. Deshaun Foster already in the previous week leading up to the LSU game said, I am not going to address injuries until it's game day and unless it's a season-ending injury, in which Keanu Williams, he is a big piece of the interior defensive line. You already had Jay Tawia, who missed some practice time, made a couple of plays in that game against LSU. But what really hurt UCLA? The lack of any presence in the backfield with the quarterback facing any pressure, right? The Bruins, yes, and Keanu Williams is not going to fix that. A lot of that can help with edge pressure and edge contain. And there are still a few transfers who have not made their way into the foray, like a Sharif Say, who was making his way late after getting cleared for UCLA late in the practice schedule, in the lead up to the season. But UCLA needs an uptick on the D-line. They haven't had a sack since week 1 against Hawaii, and the majority of those sacks did not come from the defensive line. So losing Keanu Williams is a big loss for UCLA. That is one of those stalwarts you hoped that Chip Kelly stole the portal way back when, was going to be an anchor this year alongside Jay Tawia, and the Bruins would rotate on the edge with Akaika Malloy saying before the season, I'm just going to rotate, see who's got the hot hand. Well, he hasn't had that depth that would have liked to have this year, and he's not going to have it with the team that we already mentioned has some talent. Now, there's different levels of talent, right? There's tiers. There's national championship. There's NFL Sunday. There's top 10 pick. There is maybe going to develop into NFL starter level talent, Sunday guys who will play on Sundays. The Bruins have some talent, but they did not have depth. And losing a Williams on the D-line is crushing for UCLA. Now, another thing I saw mentioned was the adjustment of Nicky Prongos. He is going to get the start this week. I believe they said Deshaun Foster at right guard, right? At right guard for UCLA, an offensive line that has struggled to keep the quarterback Ethan Garbers protected. 5 sacks for the opposition in LSU, 0 for UCLA. So the 1-2 combo, not getting pressure to get off the field on third downs and not keeping your quarterback upright consistently is the problem. And getting Prongos up there, I know there was DeGiorgio who did lead the game for a little bit on Saturday with some injuries. The Bruins have struggled to figure out who is going to be the 5 on the offensive line. Chip Kelly couldn't figure it out last year because he refused to go out and recruit. He went in the offensive line. Deshaun Foster came in late in the cycle. So finding what he had left, which wasn't already, it was not a perfect refined product. It was not, Eric Bieniemy is not inheriting, regardless of what we think, he is not inheriting perfection. He is inheriting a flawed product, and he needs a certain design, a certain strength, and the offensive line is not the strength of this team. If they could protect Garbers as well as LSU protected their quarterback, and those are they're not the same thing. A very good offensive line versus a UCLA team that's still very much a work in progress and trying to understand with some communication issues they had in week 1 to Hawaii to now. If they could protect Garbers, then this would all be on Ethan Garbers, right? This would all be the understanding of the offense, the receivers, the skill players, but it's them getting the chance and the strength in the trenches that can keep them competitive is the problem. And to see an adjustment already, that's something to note against an Oregon team that wants to fly across the field, play fast, and play physical. They have not done so consistently so far, right? Oregon, in the first few weeks of the season. They're coming off a bye where they had their strongest win of the year, a dominant win over Oregon State, where it was closer going to the half. Oregon State ran the ball on them, and then the Ducks pulled away. But two inconsistent performances where Boise State ran on them. They were physical. You had Idaho, who did their best on the defensive line to keep things interesting, and then did just enough offensively to stay close in that game late against the Ducks, the Idaho team who thrashed Wyoming, and the Vandals are going to be one of the top teams to beat in the FCS level. So now we're sitting here wondering, all right, what else is next? And then another injury, season-ending injury, is Kanye Clark in the secondary. So you're piling up a defense that doesn't necessarily have the depth, right? Ale Cajo was out in that game as well. So you're missing a starting linebacker. You're missing a starting D lineman. You're missing Kanye Clark. So two defensive starters out for the year. Unfortunate. And it just sucks, right? UCLA wants to have as many options as possible, many different packages with players in the secondary, rotating the interior defensive line. You wished you had some more depth there. UCLA just does not have it. At least they have not shown it to this point, to where guys can go in and make plays. Not allowed to Murphy-level plays under last year's defense, but just go into the backfield and get a sack. And it's not on Williams. It's not on all these guys, but they need to go. There's just not a talent bunch overall there, and they're shifting things in the offensive line, and that is the biggest weakness for this year's team. If they could truly be a threat on one of those sides, right? If they could keep Garbers up every time and run the football, this UCLA team would be extremely fun to watch. And we'd probably watch a lot more high-scoring games, Big 12-esque, right? Pac-12, last year, high-scoring, high-flying offenses. If they could keep Garbers up consistently and showcase the build of a run game and be more of a threat with the Hardins, the Burgers, and the change of pace in Keegan Jones, then this UCLA team could look closer to a bowling team than it does. Heck, if they had a strong defensive line, the UCLA offense could maybe muster up a little bit, and then defensive line could do things. But they had a strong defensive line last year, and they lost the talent, a good portion of that NFL talent. You're changing coordinators on both offense and defense, and that's where this conundrum is for this team that they had the late start, right? It's going to be Big Ten after dark with the 8 p.m. start. They had the late night Monday night practice trying to flip things around. School's in session. This is a whole new week with an Oregon team coming off a bye, but a UCLA team that looked much better than they did against Indiana when they played LSU in the hot, humid Louisiana fall. And the Bruins came out and competed for a half. And considering the score was a one-score game heading into the fourth quarter, you could say they competed into the fourth quarter. They competed for 3 quarters, looked impressive for 2. And Oregon's a weird team to predict. It's another 24-point, point cover. Potentially. That's the spread right now for UCLA Oregon. If you go look at FanDuel, right? It's a big cover again for UCLA. They're at home in the Rose Bowl. It's a weird night game. I wonder what's going to be. But the Bruins come out, show up, then they could very well try and punch this Oregon team in the mouth. But the problem is how you go with that little cliche you talk about, punch them in the mouth. It's the trenches that dominate, and that's not what UCLA has right now. If they can just find a way to do it, maybe. That's the biggest weakness, and having 2 injuries, especially one on the D-line, is brutal. And then a starting switch on the O-line, that's something to look out for. And we'll get more on it. I'm going to talk to Spencer McLaughlin later in the week, Locked on Ducks, talk about this UCLA-Oregon matchup. If UCLA can handle one of these two, right? If they can get Dylan Gabriel under duress, keep everything underneath, and force Oregon to make some dumb fourth down decisions, have them go super aggressive like Brian Kelly did earlier, or keep them out of field goal range, then maybe UCLA could have a chance to make it interesting as well Saturday night. But it all is pivotal to look at the strength of the offensive line and the defensive line for UCLA's chances to do anything against Oregon. Next, we're going to talk about another big ad on the UCLA women's basketball schedule. I'm not sure how Corey Close and the UCLA women keep adding these games. Another far game, but it makes sense. We'll talk about it next on Locked on UCLA. 5 Hour Energy fixes tired fast. Whether you have a long list to do for work or a list of do-it-yourself DIY products to tackle at home, take a 5 Hour Energy shot so you can check everything off your list. If you're like me, you're going to have a large list of things to do, and you need to do it. And if you want the energy, the most important supply, that's the 5 Hour Energy shot. So you can get in the zone because it's got zero sugar, convenient portable size to bring with you anywhere, whether you're staying up for the UCLA game late Saturday night and you got all those DIY products to keep you busy until the game. Do it with the 5 Hour Energy shot. You can have a 12-pack or 24-pack delivered right to your door with all the flavors possible. All you got to do is go to 5hourenergy.com. That is the number 5. hourenergy.com. Get some 5 Hour Energy product today. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and will not and cannot be used in any other promotions. The code is also not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. All right, cruising on here in Locked On UCLA, let's talk about the UCLA women's basketball schedule. One of the big announcements, I believe, earlier today on this episode earlier today when we're dropping this episode, September 24th, was the addition of the UCLA Baylor game, January 20th. And that is when both these teams are in the middle of conference play. For Baylor, that means that's when they're in the heart of Big 12 play. For the Bruins, they will be in the depths of Big 10 play. So it's something different, something new. January 20th, all right? So this is a Baylor team that had, 25 plus wins. They got 12 wins in the Big 12 last year, made it to the Sweet 16, very close to knocking off USC in the Sweet 16, 74-70 loss. The team that got deep in the tournament, same level. And UCLA is playing a neutral site game in the early portion of the conference schedule in New Jersey. So how does UCLA swing that? All right, let me remind you what Corey Close's team is doing this year. All right, a team that's supposed to be a top 5 team in the country, definitely a top 10 team. Opening night, they play in France. So that Monday night, the season starts, they're playing a quality program in Paris, France. Then they come back 6 days later to play 2 games in 3 days at home in Poly. And then later in the week, they play Poly Pavilion against Arkansas. And to end November, they get to play South Carolina, the reigning undefeated champs. And I think UCLA owes them one for a Sweet 16 loss and a loss in Columbia in 22. Then over the Thanksgiving weekend, I think it's Thanksgiving, late November, early December, they're going to Hawaii to play Fresno UT Martin, Hawaii. Those are games UCLA should win a lot. It's a lot of travel to prepare the Bruins for Big Ten play. They're still going to Hawaii. They're going to enjoy the feast week. Awesome. That's 3 games in 3 days. That's a brutal stretch just to play a lot. Hopefully a lot of depth pieces will play in those games. You don't have to worry about that. Then you start Big Ten play early December against Washington on the road, mind you. 2 local games at home and on the road against Big West teams, Long Beach and Cal Poly. And then late December, what do? You get Creighton. They go to play Creighton in the Invisalign Bay Area Women's Classic. So UCLA is on the docket to play a bunch of these games, and they're playing Creighton, another solid program, in San Francisco, in the home of the Warriors, on a Friday night. So I know San Francisco, that's an easy trip for UCLA. Still, that's another place to go play somebody in a neutral site. When Big Ten play's already started, and they start by hosting Nebraska and Michigan on December 29th and New Year's Day. But the big one for this UCLA women's team is the fact that in between hosting Northwestern and Penn State in mid-January, they're going to play Baylor, which is already listed on the Baylor website. All right, I'm not sure if it's listed on the UCLA website. I'm looking at it. It's listed on a Monday night at the Prudential Center in the Coretta Scott King Classic in Newark, New Jersey. UCLA is playing Baylor. So after, all these things, they snuck in a game on a Monday night after they play Penn State on a Wednesday. So you wonder, how is this UCLA schedule going to work? How are they going to go to New Jersey when the next week, at the end of January, UCLA is on the road? Ironically enough, I wonder if this was foresight or just a little luck. They wanted to have that, Monday night game, probably prime time. It's, I think, either 3:30 or 5:30. I probably think it's Eastern. I don't even know when that time is, but it's one of those. They haven't figured out the time slot for the game. UCLA, that same week, plays at Rutgers. So Monday night they play Baylor in New Jersey. Then I would assume they take all their classes via Zoom in New Jersey, and you play at Rutgers on a Thursday night, and then you play 2 days later in Maryland, because that's the travel party you're going to get, Rutgers, Maryland, for the UCLA basketball teams. You get Rutgers, Maryland, Monday night in New Jersey, a week on the East Coast, and then they come back and play Minnesota, Ohio State, get some road Big Ten games, another trip on the road before end of the season, regular season against USC. So all of a sudden, you just sneak in a Big Ten, a top-tier power conference game. Like, they keep adding these. Like, I keep seeing the Creightons. I keep seeing then you see the Paris-France game against Louisville. But then the inaugural Coretta Scott King Classic that's going to be played on MLK Day. The games played on that day will involve UCLA, Baylor, and then Maryland, Texas. So you got 2 Big Ten teams involved there, 2 Big 12 teams. Looks like a miniature Big 12, Big 10 challenge, dubbed the Coretta Scott King Challenge. Classic. And then UCLA, already on the East Coast, will go fly a little earlier. It'll be airing nationally on Fox, and then they'll stay there the whole week to play Rutgers a couple days later. So I think that would help with the travel. They have a Wednesday game, and sometimes you see this, right? Some powerhouse. This is a women's basketball thing, and this is not a bad thing, right? You'll see when there's a weird break in the schedule, like UConn will go play somebody, or they'll go play somebody in the middle of their conference schedule just because. And that's super baller. That's so awesome. So UCLA has a tough game. I'm like, man, how are they going to fit this game in New Jersey? After going to Paris, going to Hawaii, going to a non-conference game and during conference play in New Jersey, well, after they're going to Rutgers, and then they got to go to San Francisco, multiple trips in the Big Ten. The football team, both basketball teams, they're racking up the mileage. They are picking it up, and it'll be so much fun. All right? So UCLA, they're playing Baylor. I was just like, dude, how is there another game, which they probably had on the schedule that they did not release in their initial non-conference schedule release? Then the Big Ten schedule came out, and it's funny to see this is still the last add-on as these official practices are about to get started for both the men and the women. I'm excited for Corey Close's bunch. Their depth will be tested. I wonder about the health of a Charlize Ledger-Walker. I wonder how the freshmen will acclimate, how the super team, the super core from the Bets, the London Jones of the world, I wonder just how they're all going to move on when you lose one of your leading scorers all time in program history. You lose a Cam Brown, you lose a Charisma Osborne. How will they gel into this next year for UCLA? Well, it's going to be Kiki Rice's team with a Lauren Betts. I'm excited for a team that should be picked to finish close to the top of the Big Ten, if not 1, 2, or 3. And I'm not thinking they're 3. So it'll be a fun year for women's basketball. And now we're starting to see more Big Ten schedules released. So what is it going to look like for these UCLA sports in Big Ten conferences when they when they travel, I should say? The softball team released their Big Ten schedule. Let's talk about how that scheduling is going to look and what it's going to look like compared to what it used to. Next on Locked On UCLA. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. So when you get to the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, here, wrapping up Locked On UCLA today. And while I'm talking the Big Ten release for the UCLA softball schedule, right? Taking a look at what these travel schedules, what a lot of these sports we're talking about, how much travel they're going to do, what the weekends look like for these teams, and what it means for the rest of the sports, beyond just football, who gets to take charters, or these other sports, which will slowly begin to take charters on these long coastal trips from one coast to the other. This is what the Big Ten softball schedule looks like for UCLA. The Bruins will start the season hosting Purdue. Okay, that's a 3-game set. Then the next weekend, they go to Iowa. Strange. Cool. It's getting weird when they start playing these teams, and it will be weird in all these other games. But what's unique there is they play Iowa on the road March 22nd to 23rd. I wonder how cold it will be. Be a lot colder than what they would play in other Big Ten and other Pac-12 cities, although it still gets cold depending on when they play them. They play Iowa in March for 2 days. For 2 days. Notice how some of these power conference schools, having gone and done games with, mid-majors, they play their softball schedules on a Saturday, Sunday, or Friday, Saturday. They say instead of paying the bus costs, the flight costs, they schedule games for 2 days, and then they don't play that third day so they can get all the games out. That is what you're going to start seeing, at least for UCLA, to save the budget. So right now, you have a series against Iowa that's March 22nd, 23rd, instead of a 3-game set where you use your pitcher or your ace gets a day's rest in between, right? And it's softball, yes, they can pitch again and again, and this is more of a softball thing than what we'll see in baseball, but that's how they're going to slowly consolidate to save money. They're going to put these, what should be a 3-game set on 3 days, will be a 2-day game, right? It'll be a 2-day, 1 game and a doubleheader in a game. So your ace will have less rest. That's something to look forward for Kelly Inouye Perez's team. Then you're going to have Ohio State. UCLA hosts them April 4th and 5th. What does that mean? You're going to have a doubleheader one of those days and a game on the next day. And while that's not exactly the trend throughout this schedule, UCLA hosts Purdue. They go to Iowa, come back. Next weekend, go to Maryland. Who knows what the weather in Maryland's going to be looking like late March. Then you come back, play Ohio State, you play Washington. Cool. Then the next weekend, late to mid-April, you go to Oregon. Come back a week later, go to Michigan. Come back, host Northwestern, which will be a solid battle. All right, a solid battle. Not exactly the grind, I think, every week was in the Pac-12 schedule in softball, in my opinion, in my not-so-humble opinion, but the travel, grueling. Basketball will be brutal. Softball will be brutal because they got Iowa and Maryland back-to-back. Oregon, and then they got to go to Ann Arbor to return. UCLA has 2 weekends on the road where they got back-to-back twice. Only do they have 1 back-to-back weekend at home during conference play. Now, they haven't released the schedule, and the big thing is softball, baseball, West Coast teams, they're not going east. UCLA's not going east. They're going to go to sometimes the Puerto Vallarta tournament. They'll go to Cal State Fullerton. They'll go to the Judy Garmin. They'll go up north. They'll go to Long Beach. They'll play a midweek here. They're not going other places. So they will not travel, in my opinion. I don't think they would. They probably should not because everybody wants to come to the West Coast. Better weather to start the season that starts in early February, even though SoCal and the West Coast is getting a lot more wet weather and worse, colder weather during the winter part of the softball schedule. It's still generally better, other than maybe going to the South, on the West Coast to start the season. UCLA's most likely not going to travel. Although last year they did go to Florida, warmer weather state. I doubt they do that more consistently in years where they got to travel in Big Ten play. And it helps that they're going to alternate the Washington-Oregon series in softball, right? USC doesn't have a softball team. They're going to alternate those, make sure, hey, you get a home one here, you get a road one there. Might be even a little easier for baseball because you mix in Oregon, USC, Washington with all that. Then UCLA, one of those road series is going to be very close. And if they get 2 of those, very close. So baseball has it easier than softball, I would think, travel-wise. While softball, it's like, hey, you got 2 days. You're going to lose a day of games if they consolidate 2 of these series into 2-day series as opposed to 3 days and 3 games. Something to look out for. And one of those things was LA Times, all the other pundits, myself, how much money, how much time are they spending on the other athletes later in the season when, hey, is it 10 less hotel rooms and less food to buy for staying out the extra day for the baseball team or for the softball team? It's how they're going to cut the budget a little bit while still trying to keep the support. Or when they go back-to-back, it's, hey, quick Iowa trip, that next trip better be, or the one trip before, only 2 days, we're going to land there, limited practice time. What happens if there's bad weather and you got to stay? I wonder what these bad weather games are going to look like. If they have a shorter series, like when they play Ohio State in April, very well could be bad weather in SoCal. You never know. April showers bring May flowers. And then you got Iowa. Iowa in March in softball? Ooh, brother. Oh, brother. 2 days to get those games in? We'll see how that works. We will see how that works. All right. But until then, UCLA basketball, their schedule starts, their practice schedule starts. We're going to talk about them and get excited. And coming up, we'll have a Locked On Ducks crossover. We'll talk with Spencer McLaughlin about UCLA, Oregon, leading up into this game. Keys, thoughts, score predictions, everything here on Locked On UCLA. Like, comment, subscribe, download. Thanks for your support. Get your hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.